Jackson stepped into the grand lobby, his boots leaving faint marks on the polished marble floor. The scent of fresh orchids mingled with aged wood, whispering wealth and legacy. Overhead, golden chandeliers dripped with crystals, their glow soft yet surgical, revealing every crease in his travel-worn hoodie and the dust clinging to his jeans. He looked like a man out of place. That was intentional. The room stilled the moment he neared the front desk. Clara, the manager, didn't speak. She didn't need to. A single glance, eyes like ice behind perfectly applied mascara, scanned him top to bottom. Then, with a subtle flick of her wrist, she reached under the desk and pressed a button. Silent, practiced, ruthless. 2 security guards emerged from the corridor like clockwork. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to assert a verdict. You don't belong here. Jackson didn't flinch. His hands remained relaxed at his sides, his gaze unwavering. He had seen this play out before. Prejudice veiled as policy, exclusion masquerading as professionalism. But this moment wasn't the climax. It was the prelude. In precisely 20 minutes, Clara's name would be erased from the hotel's records. Her polished career, dismantled. Her quiet power, gone. But no one watching knew that yet. Not the affluent guests swirling Merlot in crystal glasses, wrapped in $1,000 coats. Not the staff who had been taught to look away rather than look deeper. Certainly not Clara, whose faint smile betrayed the thrill of exercising control. To them, Jackson was just another man who didn't fit the decor, but they were all about to fail a test they didn't know they were taking. Jackson Wade, 38, founder and CEO of Jackson Hospitality Group, a man whose empire stretched across 11 countries, his hotels a synonym for discretion and excellence, net worth north of $3.2 billion. The irony was almost poetic. 2 days prior, he had quietly acquired the Grand Royal chain, the very hotel he now stood in. Not through fanfare or press conferences, but through a web of holding companies and back-channel deals. By the time the ink dried, he had already booked the penthouse suite. Under a pseudonym, naturally. There were no internal memos, no champagne toasts. Just silence. Because this visit wasn't for celebration. It was an autopsy. He didn't wear the armor of wealth. He wore a battered leather jacket with scuffed shoulders. His jeans bore the fatigue of a long walk through unfamiliar streets. His backpack, old, fraying, slung over one shoulder like a forgotten burden. Everything about him whispered average. And that was the trap. As he stepped through the gleaming revolving doors into the chandelier-lit lobby, the shift was immediate. Heads turned. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. A man behind a newspaper lowered it slightly. A woman in designer heels raised an eyebrow, then her wine glass, whispering into the ear of her friend. Their expressions weren't cruel, just indifferent. And in many ways, that was worse. Because indifference is a verdict without trial. Jackson didn't meet their stares. He walked forward with the quiet confidence of a man who had built fortunes and buried failures. Each step echoed, not loud, but steady. A rhythm, a promise. He wasn't here to be welcomed. He was here to see the truth. And truth only surfaces when no one thinks they're being watched. The young receptionist hesitated, her fingers hovering above the keyboard like they were unsure whether to type or call for help. She was young, probably new, unsure whether to follow instinct or protocol. But before she could decide, Clara entered, heels clicking sharply like punctuation marks. Her posture was impeccable, her voice glacial. "This is private property," she said with the ease of someone who had said it 1,000 times. "We don't allow walk-ins." Jackson met her gaze, calm and steady. "I have a reservation," he said. "Jackson Group." Clara didn't ask for ID, didn't check the system. Her head tilted slightly, as if studying an anomaly, a smudge on an otherwise perfect mirror. It wasn't just about one man being out of place. It was about an institution built on image, and an invisible hand now testing its spine. There were no raised voices, no confrontations, just two people playing chess with expressions. Behind Jackson's composed demeanor, the first ripple of irritation stirred, not from offense, but from confirmation. And behind Clara's curated smile was a dangerous certainty that she had already won. She had no idea just how badly she was about to lose. Clara didn't ask for a name. She didn't need one. Her arms crossed with rehearsed elegance, posture rigid with authority. Her voice, clipped and cold, cut through the silence like a scalpel. "I think you've got the wrong place." From behind Jackson, a quiet chuckle slipped out. A man in a tailored suit leaned over to whisper something to his companion, amusement dancing on his face. Another guest sipped his drink with a smirk, shaking his head. The mockery wasn't loud. It was worse than that. It crept, slithered, spreading like a slow infection. The kind that doesn't scream. It whispers. And those whispers echo. Still, Jackson's face remained composed, as if he were studying a painting rather than being humiliated. His voice, smooth and even, held no edge. "I'd appreciate it," he said softly, "if you'd check the system." Clara's head tilted again, a gesture of condescension masked as curiosity. "There's really no need." The words struck deeper than the tone. Around him, the room wasn't just watching, it was judging. Not with anger, not with disgust, but with something colder, detachment. Like a gallery of strangers silently agreeing, this man doesn't belong. Not because they knew him, but because of how he looked. But Jackson stood his ground. Not because he needed their acceptance, but because he was gathering truth. Every word Clara spoke was data. Every look, every snide whisper was proof of the culture beneath the polished floor and the gilded edges. Then, Clara took it one step further. Her smile was polished, but her voice had the steel of quiet cruelty. "We have a certain standard here," she said, slow and precise. "You may be more comfortable somewhere, less particular." It was a sentence designed not to humiliate, but to erase. Polite exile, dressed as suggestion. The air shifted. A man in suede loafers chuckled under his breath, muttering just loud enough, he probably just wandered in. Laughter followed, not boisterous but sharp. The kind meant to be shared, not concealed. Jackson didn't react. He let it simmer. Let them write the ending to their own story. He didn't flinch, didn't posture. His silence wasn't a retreat. It was a container, collecting the ugliness with measured precision. These people believed his stillness meant submission. But to Jackson, it meant patience. Let them play their parts. Because this wasn't about Clara anymore. It was about the machine she belonged to, the system that empowered her and affirmed her in real time. And like all broken systems, it eventually revealed itself. Without a word, Jackson reached into his jacket. The sound of leather brushing fabric was the only warning. He placed a matte black card on the counter, heavy, unmistakable. The Centurion, a symbol of access reserved for the elite. No limit, no application, invitation only. Clara glanced at it once, and then smiled. Anyone can fake one these days. It was more than a dismissal, it was defiance. And this time, the room did react. A sharp inhale, a flinch from the receptionist. Someone in the back let out a low whistle. Not playful, tense. The kind of sound that says, "Did she really just say that?" The atmosphere tightened, like the lobby itself had exhaled and was now holding its breath. Jackson didn't move. His fingers rested beside the card, his expression unchanged. He wasn't here to impress anyone, but he would not be erased. Clara wasn't just making an error in judgment. She was making a statement. She saw power, and she denied it. Not out of ignorance, but out of arrogance. That was what mattered most. His voice was steady, but it carried weight now. I'm asking you one last time. Check the system." Clara didn't meet his gaze. Instead, she turned and pressed a button beneath the counter. Then she spoke into the radio. Clear, practiced, and heartless. "This guest is creating a disturbance. Please escort him out." She said it like she'd said it before. Routine, protocol. Ryan, the young receptionist, froze. His hand hovered over the keyboard, caught between duty and doubt. His eyes flicked from Jackson to Clara. His lips parted, unsure of what to say. He felt something was off. But Clara was authority, and authority demanded compliance. From somewhere deep in the hotel, footsteps echoed. Heavy, deliberate, security. Jackson's card remained untouched on the counter. He didn't look at Clara. He looked at Ryan. And in that brief moment, Jackson's gaze carried no accusation, only clarity. Ryan saw it. This wasn't a confrontation. This was a crucible. "Sir," Ryan asked quietly, "are you absolutely sure you made a reservation?" Jackson nodded. Calm, controlled. "I'm sure. Penthouse suite, 3 nights, booked under Jackson Group." Then he added, just loud enough for Ryan to hear, "And I'm making a point to remember every face I've seen tonight." Ryan blinked. The guards arrived. Built for silence. Built for presence. Clara pointed. Sharp, certain. Ryan didn't move. His hand hovered, frozen. Something in his gut twisted. The man in front of him didn't match the accusation. He spoke too calmly, stood too firmly. There was no panic, only purpose. And it started to click. Something was wrong here, and it wasn't the man in the hoodie. The guards approached. One reached out and gently touched Jackson's shoulder. The other gestured toward the doors. Professional, controlled, almost apologetic. Jackson didn't resist. He moved with them, slow and deliberate. Around him, the lobby became a theater of judgment. Clara's voice followed him, loud, purposeful. "He's impersonating a VIP guest. We've had incidents like this before." Phones appeared, screens lit up, guests angled for better views, not out of outrage, but for sport. Their cocktail hour now had entertainment. Jackson walked without resistance, his hands visible, his back straight. It wasn't shame, it wasn't fear. It was a kind of mourning for them. He scanned the room slowly, memorizing every face, every smirk, every flash of a camera lens. There was no anger in his eyes, only remembrance. Near the bar, a woman leaned in and whispered, "That's what happens when you try to fake your way in." One of the guards, walking beside Jackson, muttered, "Sorry, sir. We're just doing our job." Jackson didn't respond. He had already begun writing the next chapter, in silence. As the glass doors loomed ahead, another voice cut through, soft but biting. "How'd he even make it past the front desk?" There was no answer, just a breath of agreement, a snort, and then silence. But it wouldn't last long, because in just a few hours, everything they thought they knew about this man, this place, and this night would fall apart. Across the room, a woman in pearls lifted her phone with effortless discretion, snapping a photo without flash, without hesitation. There was no embarrassment, only curiosity disguised as social documentation. Another moment to share in whispers or group chats. Another digital souvenir from a night they believed belonged to them. Clara remained near the reception desk, arms folded like a queen surveying her conquered territory. Her eyes tracked Jackson as he was led out like a trespasser, not a titan. "This," she said smugly, her voice sharp with pride, "is why we have standards." That word lingered like smoke. Standards. Not honor, not truth, not humanity. Just a convenient word to uphold exclusion. Jackson heard every syllable, every whisper, every smirk hidden behind champagne flutes and faux concern. Not a single person questioned her. No one challenged the assumption. Because in this place, perception was law, and perception had just passed a false judgment without a trial. Outside, Beneath the golden glow of the hotel's crest, Jackson stopped. The cool night air kissed his skin, but it didn't cool the fire beneath it. His fingers wrapped around his phone. "Sarah," he said quietly but with steel, "schedule a full board call. 20 minutes, and send the press release." There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then he added, his voice lower, more precise, "And make sure someone captures every face in that lobby." He ended the call, tucking the phone away as calmly as if it were a pen after signing a deal. The sting of what happened still clung to him, not because of what they said, but because of the silence, the complicity, the comfort with which strangers watched a man be dismissed as disposable. But this wasn't humiliation. It was revelation. He hadn't come seeking praise. He came searching for proof. And tonight, they'd handed it to him like a gift wrapped in prejudice. With quiet certainty, Jackson turned and vanished through the revolving doors, leaving only the hiss of glass behind him, and the weight of what they had just done. Inside, Clara was still basking in applause. A few guests nodded at her approvingly. One elderly gentleman, in an expensive blazer, reached out to shake her hand. "Good call," he said with a knowing nod. "Can't be too careful these days." Clara returned his smile, gracious and glowing, as if she'd just extinguished a fire rather than ignited one. But behind the desk, Ryan sat motionless. His fingers finally landed on the keyboard, this time with purpose. Something gnawed at him, an unease he could no longer ignore. He typed, "Jackson Group, Penthouse, 3 nights." The reservation loaded instantly, corporate tier, flagged VIP. Ryan's heart stopped. The data screamed what his gut had whispered. Jackson hadn't lied, he hadn't bluffed, and Ryan hadn't stopped it. The mistake wasn't just Clara's. It had a witness, and now it had a record. Ryan clicked deeper into the file. Executive tier, CEO-level clearance booked 3 days prior. He hesitated, then opened a browser and typed, "Jackson Wade." The screen filled with headlines: Forbes, Business Insider, Hospitality News. Jackson Wade, CEO of Jackson Hospitality Group, billion-dollar deal closes acquisition of Grand Royal Hotel chain. And there it was, the photo. Same jacket, same eyes, same quiet command. "He's the CEO," Ryan whispered aloud, staring at the screen. "He owns this place." He looked up, stunned. Clara was still chatting with guests, perfectly composed, but Ryan's world had just upended. The man they had just expelled wasn't a fraud. He was the reason the lights were on, the reason the uniform on his back even existed. And in exactly 20 minutes, Jackson Wade would return. This time, the world would be watching. The revolving doors turned once more. He stepped through. The same dusty jacket, the same steady gait. But this time, the air didn't greet him with laughter. It froze. Silence swept across the lobby like a thunderclap in a cathedral. Glasses paused mid-air. Words caught in throats. A woman fumbled with her phone and dropped it with a clatter. Another clinked her wine glass against porcelain too hard. It cracked. From behind the desk, Ryan didn't speak. His voice escaped him, barely a whisper. "He's back." He came back. Jackson didn't speak. He didn't scan the room for faces. He just walked, calm and deliberate, straight to the front desk, as if he were walking into a room he built. Because he was. The stage was now his, and the audience was no longer unaware. He stopped in front of the desk and looked directly at Ryan. No blame, no scorn. Just clarity. Just truth. "I believe," he said calmly, "you still have my reservation on file." Ryan's voice cracked beneath the weight of it. The reservation was still glowing on the screen. He didn't even need to touch a key. "Yes, sir," Ryan said, breath catching. "Penthouse suite. 3 nights. Confirmed." The words dropped like a stone into silence, sending invisible ripples through the marble and bone of the room. Guests turned. Eyes narrowed. Some mouths parted but made no sound. A couple by the fireplace leaned forward, trying to piece together what they'd just witnessed. One woman looked toward Clara, waiting to see the reaction of the woman who had just committed the unthinkable. Jackson didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. He reclaimed his place not with volume, but with presence. He was the man they tried to erase, and now they had no choice but to see him. Clara's voice rang out, shrill and sharp, trying to retake control. "What is he doing back in here?" She stormed forward, anger in her step, eyes full of fire. But the fire was flickering now, unstable. She didn't know she no longer held the power in this room. Jackson didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed a single, sleek black business card on the counter. The silver lettering shimmered under the lights. Jackson Wade, Chief Executive Officer, Jackson Hospitality Group. No words, just the card. Clara stopped mid-step. The front desk clerk beside Ryan gasped, the sound sharp, like a fuse catching. Somewhere behind them, a phone slipped from a hand. The thud echoed louder than it should have. Jackson still didn't look up. His silence carried the full weight of every truth they tried to bury. I don't need to raise my voice. I don't need to explain myself. I just need you to read. Now, Clara was the one under the microscope. Her color drained. Her voice faltered. "Anyone can print a business card," she mumbled. It was weak. It was over. Jackson lifted his phone with the same stillness that had carried him through everything tonight. "Sarah," he said, voice crisp. "Patch me into the boardroom, speaker mode." A moment later, the room was filled with a voice, clear, professional, unmistakably high-ranking. "Mr. Wade," it said warmly, "welcome to your new flagship property. We've been expecting your check-in." The words struck like thunder. Everyone heard them. No one spoke. Ryan lowered his gaze. A guest near the elevator covered their mouth in stunned silence. And just like that, the narrative changed. The ghost they'd tried to expel had returned as the author of their story. One guest slowly sank back into their seat, unsure of where to place their hands, unsure of what to feel. The room, once comfortably arrogant, now felt stripped bare. Clara stood frozen, her world dismantling not with a scream, but with facts, quiet voices, and a truth she could no longer outmaneuver. She had scoffed at the business card. She couldn't scoff at the boardroom voice. Her carefully rehearsed excuses wilted in the silence that followed. She turned slowly, eyes sweeping the lobby as if searching for a lifeline. For someone, anyone, who might intervene, explain, take the fall for her. But the people who had nodded at her with polite smiles only minutes earlier now avoided her gaze like it burned. Phones were lowered. Eyes dropped. The same room that had propped her up now stepped quietly away, ashamed of its own complicity. Behind the desk, Ryan finally let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He leaned slightly toward his coworker and whispered, "We made a big mistake." But Jackson didn't look at Clara. He didn't need to. He looked at the room, at the system. "I didn't come here for revenge," he said. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. "I came to clean house." His tone was cold steel, measured, clean, unforgiving. He hadn't forced anyone's hand. He hadn't demanded respect. He had simply given them the opportunity to show who they really were. And they had. Now it was his turn. His phone, resting calmly on the desk, came to life on speaker. A crisp, formal voice filled the lobby like the toll of a bell. "This is the executive board of Jackson Hospitality Group. We are monitoring the situation at Grand Royal. And yes, press outlets have already picked it up." The energy shifted instantly. Conversations died mid-breath. Even the air thickened. Clara's throat tightened. Her hands, once rigid and confident, now hung at her sides, trembling slightly. She looked to Jackson, then to the exit, then back. No escape. He turned to her at last, measured, almost sympathetic. Still want to follow protocol? He asked. Or shall we create a new one together? Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. This was no longer a confrontation. It was a reckoning, recorded, witnessed, stamped by the voices that held the keys to her fate. For the first time, she understood. She didn't run the show. She had just been borrowing the lights. Jackson didn't gloat. He turned to Ryan instead. Pull the guest complaint records, he said. Last 12 months, filter by management actions. Ryan hesitated, just for a breath, then began typing. The monitor behind the desk flickered to life. A list appeared. Name after name. Complaint after complaint. 17 entries, all linked to one person. Clara Langford, Jackson said aloud. He didn't need to raise the volume. The number carried all the weight. Clara stepped forward, voice faltering between defense and desperation. Those reports are exaggerated, misunderstandings. You can't take them all at face value. Jackson didn't blink. And the 6 payouts? She froze. Ryan clicked again. On the screen, 6 confidential settlements populated, discreet, dated, undeniable. This isn't a pattern, Jackson continued, his tone calm but lethal. It's a practice. The lobby held its breath. He didn't need to argue. The facts had already spoken. Clara stood, isolated in her silence, stripped of her titles, exposed, not by rumor, but by record. Then, from the side of the lobby, a voice broke the tension. A woman in a housekeeping uniform stepped forward, slow but deliberate. Her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her voice was soft. She yelled at me once, she said. For nothing, I was just in her line of sight. Clara's mouth opened, a protest forming. But Jackson raised a hand, not to her, but to the room. Then he turned toward the security camera above the desk. He spoke not only to those watching now, but to those who had ever been silenced before. If you've experienced the same, he said, you're not invisible, you're not alone. Now is the time to speak. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, a single hand lifted. Then another, a concierge, a valet, a server. Quiet acknowledgments, rising like an unexpected tide. Clara's eyes darted between them. Her confidence flickered into fear. The silence she had once trusted to protect her was shattering, and the shards were turning against her. From near the fireplace, an older woman stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but her words held weight. I had a suite booked here last spring, she said. Got a call the morning of, told it was reassigned for maintenance. She paused, but I know why. I didn't look like your usual guests. A murmur. Not of gossip, of awakening. Ryan typed fast, pulling up reservation history. Confirmed, he said. Suite was reassigned, no maintenance logged, no alternate note. Clara's voice cracked in panic. I was protecting the brand. Our image matters. We can't just... Jackson turned toward her. Not with anger, with precision. You're calling discrimination policy now. Clara's mouth opened. But her voice didn't follow. What she'd once labeled as standards now had names, faces, timelines, receipts. And the brand she defended had become evidence. Jackson faced her fully now. I used to mop floors, he said. His voice was soft, but it filled the room. At the first hotel I ever built. Clara blinked, stunned. I've carried luggage, changed linens, scrubbed bathrooms, he added. I know this industry because I started at the ground. He stepped forward, not to intimidate, but to be understood. No one gets to decide someone's worth by whether or not they walk in wearing Italian leather. Now, the silence wasn't shame. It was respect. I didn't buy this hotel to change the lobby, Jackson continued. I bought it to change the mindset. He paused, then said simply, and that change starts now. No applause, no cheers, just presence, listening. Because real leadership isn't performed, it's earned. Outside, the first news van pulled up, logo bold against the night. Then another. Lights, cameras, flashes. Inside, phones buzzed, staff and guests alike. Notifications rang out. Breaking. Jackson Wade appears unannounced at newly acquired Grand Royal Hotel. It's on the news, someone whispered. It's everywhere, said another. On Twitter, the trend surged. # Grand Royal truth clips of Jackson being escorted out were now side by side with his calm dismantling of Clara's legacy. A split screen of arrogance and accountability. In the lobby, eyes shifted from their screens back to the man still standing before them. This wasn't about policy anymore. This was about power. And what happens when power meets truth? Jackson stepped forward, his voice now addressed to the entire room. Effective immediately, he announced. All internal policies at Grand Royal will be made public. No more hidden rules, no more protected behavior. He tapped his phone, placed it on the counter again. Jennifer, he said into the call. Initiate termination protocol for Clara Langford. Immediate execution, legal and staff channels, full transparency. The lobby froze. On speaker, the response came clear. Understood. Sending now. Clara stepped forward, voice brittle. This is a setup, she snapped. You planned this. But no one spoke for her. Silence answered, and it was louder than any defense. Jackson didn't flinch. He didn't need to, because the system that had once crushed the silent had now turned its force on the powerful. Clara Langford's employment has been terminated, the voice from HR announced. Documentation signed, time-stamped, distributed to all legal and front-facing systems. At the desk, a junior employee hesitated, then moved the mouse. Clara's profile blinked onto the screen. Name, title, access. A red icon labeled Remove hovered beside it. Click, ping. A single sound, small, almost forgettable. But in that sound lived every ignored complaint, every whispered warning, every broken spirit. And in real time, Clara's name vanished from the screen, and from the legacy she thought she controlled. There was no applause, no confrontation, just a stillness. Soft, decisive, and irreversible. A single click had undone everything Clara once wielded as power. The system she'd relied on to control, to exclude, had quietly shut its doors on her. And this time, it didn't ask for her keycard. The lobby stood silent. No murmurs, no shifting feet. Just the collective breath of a space that had held too much injustice for too long, finally exhaled. The guests and staff didn't look at Jackson like a hero. They looked at him like a verdict, a truth delivered. And now they waited. Not for punishment, but for possibility. For what might come next. He let the silence live for a few more heartbeats, then finally spoke. His voice was soft, intentional. We're going to rebuild this place, he said. Not with fear, with decency, from the ground up. He turned toward Ryan. Their eyes met, not as boss and employee, but as two men who now understood each other. You, Jackson said. You hesitated. Ryan tensed slightly, unsure if this was a reprimand. But Jackson continued. That matters more than people think. The words landed like a challenge and an invitation. You might do better than the last one. It wasn't a promotion. Not yet. But it was something far more meaningful, a door, not opened by title, but by the courage to stop, to question, to listen. In that moment, hope finally entered the room like light through a cracked ceiling. Ryan lowered his gaze, heart thudding, then looked up and said, voice soft but steady, I'm ready, and I'm sorry for staying silent. Jackson nodded, not with praise, but with understanding. You're not silent now, he said. That was all that needed to be said. Outside, the glare of camera lights began to paint the lobby's walls in flickering whites. News vans lined the curb. Reporters gathered like storm clouds with mics, lenses, and questions. Inside, Ryan stood a little taller, not with ego, but responsibility. He understood now that the moment you step forward is the moment everything can change. Jackson stepped slightly aside, letting the light fall not just on himself, but on the young man who had stepped up. The world was watching now, and it wasn't just watching Jackson anymore. Camera lights pulsed like a heartbeat as microphones stretched forward. Reporters called out his name, urgent, clamoring. Jackson stepped into the center, not with notes, not with a podium, just presence. "I didn't come here to fire anyone," he said, his voice carrying without force. "I came to keep the people who deserve to stay." A click, a flash, then stillness again. He continued, firmer now. "Power means nothing if it's never tested." The words echoed like a creed. Phones lit up, tweets fired off, headlines wrote themselves in real time. Someone near the back whispered, "That line's going to live forever." But Jackson wasn't speaking to journalists. He was speaking to every employee hiding behind closed doors, every guest who had once felt overlooked, every manager who thought silence equaled safety. It didn't. Not anymore. A reporter raised her voice. "Mr. Wade, why didn't you tell people who you were?" Jackson didn't flinch. "Because I don't need people bowing when I walk in," he said. "I need them to act with integrity when they think no one's watching." Again, the room hushed. Not from discomfort. This time, from recognition. Behind the desk, Ryan watched, eyes never leaving Jackson. Slowly, he nodded. Not in fear, but in pride. Because leadership wasn't in titles. It was in truth. It didn't wear badges, it wore humility. And sometimes it started with the man who held a mop long before he held a microphone. From the edge of the lobby, a woman stepped forward. Housekeeping uniform, gloves still on. Her movements cautious, but her courage unmistakable. She stopped just short of him. Her voice trembled, but she made sure it reached him. "Thank you," she said, "for doing what no one else ever dared to." Jackson met her gaze, straight on, not above, not through, just eye to eye. Then he gave a small, respectful bow. No speech, no spotlight, just acknowledgement. A camera clicked. Then another. The light briefly silhouetted the two of them, CEO and cleaner, shoulder to shoulder. That image would circle the globe. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. In a building once obsessed with appearances, this moment had nothing to prove, and everything to remind. Respect is not a luxury. It is the foundation. 1 week later, CNN aired a segment. Footage rolled, Jackson's silent re-entry, Clara's fall, and the press conference that became a viral masterclass in accountability. Inside the Grand Royal, a new bronze plaque was mounted by the entrance. Guests stopped to read it. In a place once known for judging appearances, only those who show respect remain. No signature, no logo, just truth. Behind the front desk, Ryan now stood in a dark blazer, tie straight, lapel pin gleaming. It read, "General Manager." He didn't boast, he didn't try, but the way he looked people in the eye, the way he smiled with sincerity, said more than any title ever could. This wasn't about redemption, it was about responsibility. What Jackson had started, Ryan would carry forward. The CNN segment closed on a now familiar clip. Clara, mid-protest, silenced not by force, but by proof. The caption at the bottom, scrolled. "The cost of attitude." Online, the clip exploded. 12.4 million views in under 48 hours. Comments flooded in. "That's how it's done." Finally, a CEO who walks the talk. She judged the wrong man on the wrong day. And for once, the internet wasn't outraged. It was relieved. Because in a world filled with performative apologies, someone had finally said enough, and meant it. A week later, Jackson sat across from a podcast host in a quiet studio. No stage lights, no filters, just a mic and a glass of water. "You could have sent a memo," the host said. "Most CEOs would have." Jackson shook his head. "I didn't do it for optics," he replied. "I did it so every employee knew someone was watching, but this time, the right way." The host nodded slowly. "And now," he said, "the guests are finally being seen too." Jackson didn't nod. He didn't need to. The mic caught the silence between them. It wasn't empty. It was clear. Sometimes what matters most isn't what's said, but what's shown. The screen faded into a handwritten letter, ink soft, creased from being read again and again. A woman's voice read aloud. "I've stayed in many beautiful hotels, but this was the first time I felt like I wasn't just welcomed. I was respected." As she read, images played. Jackson walking through the lobby, nodding to a bellhop, pausing to return a smile. No background music. Just real footsteps. Real people. "Thank you," the letter ended, "for reminding me that kindness can be part of luxury. No hashtags, no applause, just truth. Because some reviews are posted online, others are written in the way a space makes you feel." The Grand Royal was calm again. Guests checked in. Staff moved with purpose. And Jackson stood by the window, watching the city stretch into the horizon. His assistant approached. "So," she asked softly, "what's next?" Jackson didn't turn. "There are still places," he said, "where people think no one's watching." A pause. "We're going there next." She nodded, already knowing, already ready. The screen faded to black. Then white text appeared, "Coming soon. Dignity check, episode 2. A low hum of music stirred beneath it. Not drama, direction, because not every battle ends in one building, and not every lobby forgets. The screen faded in again, soft and slow. A bellhop laughing with a guest. A barista handing coffee with both hands. A manager actually listening to an idea from a young staffer. Accents, smiles, lives not filtered. Then, one last message. Serving isn't about lowering yourself. It's about lifting others. No narrator, just stillness. Then a whisper, like memory. If you've ever been misjudged, if you've ever been told you didn't belong, you're not alone. The screen lingered on a porter holding the door open for a couple in wheelchairs, both laughing. No hero music. Just truth. Jackson walked through the glass. Doors of the Grand Royal again. Same floor, same chandeliers. But everything had changed. Heads turned, not in judgment, in recognition, in respect. A doorman straightened his coat. The receptionist smiled. "Welcome back, Mr. Wade." Jackson nodded. No words, no speech, just presence. Earned. Then one final message on screen. "Subscribe if you believe respect should come before a business card." The story didn't need to say more. It already had.